mode.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Güliz Barkan, and I am the president of the American Society of Cytopathology. Today is January 20th, 2021, and it, in addition to other things, marks the day that we are starting this year's educational sessions. Our first guest is the Cytopathology Program Directors Committee chaired by Dr. Sara Monaco. Dr. Monaco and our vice chair, Dr. Roseanne Wu, together with their committee, have put together a fabulous panel on to match or not to match. So if you're a program director and ever thought, why am I getting all these last minute openings of fellowship programs? Or if you are a resident and you think to yourself, oh my goodness, how young do I have to be to apply to a fellowship program? Should it be in PGY1? Where does this end? Then you're in the right panel. This is going to be wonderful, and I look forward to listening to our wonderful panelists. Thank you all on behalf of the ASC to put this panel together and for all your thoughts. Without further ado, I give you Dr. Monaco.
Thank you, Güliz, and thanks to the entire ASC office and the ASC Executive Board for restarting this educational series that started when the pandemic first hit. I think there's been great feedback, and I think Wednesday webinars started to take on a whole new meaning as a time to reconnect as a society. I also want to thank all of you in virtual attendance from taking time away from work and from the inauguration coverage to help and be here today with us. We're going to do polling before and after this, before and after the panelists speak. And so I ask you to hang with us today. And I will mention, as a committee chair, and I know Rose Wu is my vice chair of the committee, you know, we struggle with making progress over a year's time frame between annual meetings. And I think it's been really important for the ASC to support committees for having webinars like this through the year so that we can maybe make more progress as committees and as a society. And I think this is a timely topic because we've gotten a lot of feedback from program directors that they're frustrated with recruitment. And a lot of times we don't have the knowledge or kind of the understanding of how to improve it. And also, I think, you know, time is changing. And I think we've heard from applicants that, like, with the expanding job market, they're torn between taking a job when it's offered versus or continuing with a cytopathology fellowship, or maybe rescinding on their offer that they initially accepted. I think the pandemic has changed the game for us. A lot of times it's been saving money for the programs with doing virtual interviews and being able to see more applicants. And for the applicants, it saved time away from fellowship and money in terms of traveling to different places. And so the question is, like, you know, have we reached a point where we're moving closer to sort of more of a standardized and unified approach? And can the ASC support or help this initiative to make recruitment better for programs and for applicants? And we're lucky today to be joined by colleagues in pathology and a colleague who runs the San Francisco match to sort of give us perspective from pathology fellowship programs that have moved towards more of a unified approach and what they've learned in the process. And, you know, what we can gather from these sort of lessons learned from their process and what we can do as a society to maybe improve our own process. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is a colleague of mine at Geisinger, Dr. Bruce Levy, who's our Associate Chief Medical Informatics Officer. He's also a program director for our Clinical Informatics Fellowship and has had really a sort of a pivotal role in the Clinical Informatics Fellowship, going into more of a unified approach and a match process. Our second panelist is Sara Shalin from University of Arkansas. And she's an associate professor of pathology and the program director there for the Dermatopathology Fellowship. And DermPath is another one that's sort of moving towards a more unified approach. And hopefully we can gain some information from their perspective as well. And then, as I mentioned, Dennis Thomatos, who's the manager of the San Francisco match. And as a society, Güliz, Rose, and I have met with Dennis because of all the programs that offer sort of a unified matching process. San Francisco offers flexibility that other programs don't necessarily offer. And so we were interested in hearing more about that. So now I've tried to give people some time to get logged on. And so I'm going to start the polling questions before we go to the first talk by Dr. Levy. So the first question just asks, who is in attendance today in our audience? So if you are joining us from a GoToWebinar link, you can participate in polling. So I encourage everyone who's listening with the GoToWebinar to tell us who you are. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the responses. So it looks like the majority of our audience is cytopathology faculty members and cytopathology fellowship program directors, with a few number of trainees and other pathologists. We did reach out to other pathology fellowship societies that may be considering a match. So we welcome anyone outside of cytopathology as well today. Okay, the second question we have is, how often do you have problems recruiting cytopathology fellowship candidates? So have you had applicants withdraw their applications and not come to fellowship, resulting in sort of unanticipated openings? Or do you pretty much have no problems recruiting? Okay, looks like we're getting a bunch of responses. Okay, I'm going to share the responses. So it looks like the majority of people feel like sometimes or rarely, with a smaller amount saying often or always. Okay, and our next question is for the cytopathology fellowship directors in the audience. Would you be in favor at this point, knowing what you know right now, of a cytopathology fellowship matching program? Okay, we will close the poll here and share the results. So it looks like most of you are unsure, and so you're in the right place today. So as we learn some thoughts on this process, and 29% said yes in favor and 21% said no. Okay, so the next question is for the cytopathology fellows or trainees in the audience. Would you be in favor of a cytopathology fellowship match program? Okay, we'll close the polling and share here. So it seems like more fellows or applicants and trainees in the audience would be in favor than the fellowship directors. Okay, and we are going to end polling now, and we're going to go to Dr. Levy, who has a PowerPoint to share his experience with the match process in clinical informatics.
Okay. While they're bringing up my presentation, I'll introduce myself. My name's Bruce Levy. So I am also a pathologist, a forensic pathologist. And, as Sara told you, one of the chief medical informatics officers here at Geisinger, as well as our associate program director for our PATH residency and our CI program director. So like most of us, I wear a whole bunch of hats. And once I get control, I will be able to advance the slides, hopefully. I do not yet have the ability to advance. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Hopefully we will get these resolved momentarily. Jamie, do you just want to advance for me? If you're having problems.
I can't. You should be able to move it now.
All right, let's see how it goes. There it goes. Hold on, I may have overdone it. Okay, awesome. So we went one too far. Hold on 1 second while I reverse. There's a weird time delay in advancing, which makes it kind of hard to keep track of what's going on. Okay, so in 2014, we started the CI subspecialty. And it's kind of unique in a way because it's pan-specialty, open to anyone who's completed any primary residency. And our CI subspecialty has rapidly grown. We started with our initial 4 programs. I was the program director of one of those 4 back in 2016. And now we're at about 4 dozen programs. So probably about half the number of accredited programs that you currently have in cytopathology. And I happen to be part of the initial group. We decided to think about this concept of how are we going to recruit our applicants? And we very quickly realized that as a subspecialty, we believed that we were better and stronger together, and that there had to be a way to compete cooperatively for our applicants because we were such a small subspecialty, and we didn't want to create bad feelings in our subspecialty. And part of it was my experience. So I've been around in pathology for a while. So I was probably one of the last years as a resident where you actually applied for your fellowship, if you were going to do a fellowship back then, the beginning of your last year of your residency. And then I've watched as what I think of as unhealthy competition has increased that length of time, and it's led to the problems we all know about. I mean, hardly a week goes by where I don't see an email on the APC listserv about an unexpected fellowship opening. And we know a large percentage of those have to do with this big lag time between the recruiting process and actually starting the job. People's lives change both professionally and personally. And, it creates problems, and we've all experienced them. So how do we fix this? In clinical informatics, we kind of realized a few things pretty quickly. And our first question was about a common application. Because when we started out, we all had them fill out essentially the same application 4 times. And we said, that's ridiculous. So ERAS was the obvious choice for us for a common application service. The applicants are familiar with it. It's an easy system for them. They put all of their documentation in. They only got to have all the scores sent to one place. And then ERAS does all the rest. It doesn't cost us as programs anything either, which is, of course, a benefit for us. The applicants do get charged for it, but it kind of offsets the cost of getting multiple copies of all of their credentials officially sent out. And ERAS, in case you don't know it, doesn't only have a 12-month cycle, but also has an 18-month cycle. So, if you didn't want to go with a 1 year in advance, but you wanted to go into an 18-month in advance cycle, ERAS is already equipped to handle you. And it's just been a very easy process for us. And I would say it was our first very easy win. It was something we could all agree on very easily. Second was, as the slides catch up to me, so what do we do about a formal match? Do we want to do a formal match? Do we not want to do a formal match? So of course, we first went and talked to the NRMP. And the NRMP is very well known, but unfortunately, being a multi-specialty discipline, we had some unique challenges that the NRMP was really not able to address. And we actually had conversations with the SF Match for a while about that and decided not to go with them. But I'm glad you already know that there are alternatives to the NRMP, and a lot of them do have a lot more flexibility than the NRMP tends to have. So what we ended up deciding to do at the beginning was really create a formalized offer acceptance process. It was called a match. Everyone calls it a match. And I'm the person who's been running it since 2016. And I keep correcting people. It's not a match, but we call it the match. So now that we had decided we were going to do a formal offer acceptance process, we sat down and we agreed on a process. And when we were going to have the match, date and time this process was going to start. We all agreed we weren't going to make any offers prior to that. We agreed upon a process that we believed would be as fair as a process like this could be for our applicants. And then we created tools to enable us to communicate that in real time. And we agreed to just do this. Just waiting for the slide to catch up again. I should click like 15 seconds early. And so here is the document that we created. Here it comes on the right side of the screen. And we distributed this to all the applicants and the program directors. And it outlines exactly what the process is going to be, how it's going to happen, the length of time the offers are valid. This was actually the 2017 process. I couldn't find a 2016 document. But it also included some hints and suggestions for how to make the process as smooth as possible, how to be prepared, how to best communicate, to minimize any glitches in the process. But we also created documents by which this process could be monitored, as well as information provided in real time to both our programs and applicants. And these included two separate documents, which are going to come up in a second. And we created these both as Google Docs. So very simple, easy to do. And you created these two documents. Here they are. We'll go through one at a time. The one on the left here, the accredited CIF program openings, you can see has a list of programs and then how many total positions are being offered, how many of them have been filled, and how many of them are still open. So essentially, the program directors had editing capability for this document, but all of the applicants and all of the programs could watch it in real time. So applicants, as the process was going on, might have an outstanding offer. They could see if, hey, I'd rather go to this other program than the one I have an offer for. Is that program filled yet or not? Giving them information to help them make as informed a decision as they possibly could. We have found, and our applicants and fellows have found that to be very useful. The other document is a document where access as well as editing was limited just to the program directors. The difference with this one is we actually, once an applicant accepted a position in our program, we would record their name and their specialty here on the list. And that would mean that another program director would see that applicant was committed and would not make an offer to them, right? To try and minimize any sorts of conflicts. The side benefit we learned to this document was at the end, we actually had a list of all our new incoming fellows nationwide. And we actually have our fellows have organized themselves into their own little professional group. So they are able to then begin to greet and orient their new incoming fellows, before they even start. We found it a really, really great process. It's been really helpful. just to kind of show you that this has grown. So the number of programs participating, as well as the number of positions we fill, have continued to increase year over year. As I said, as the number of programs grow and interest in our subspecialty grows. So this has gone pretty well, and it has served us very, very well up to this point. So this is what I would say we've learned in clinical informatics about this. I found it really important to be flexible and not rigid. Not all of our programs offer all spots through our process. We have one of our programs is military-based. They have their own process for selecting their fellows. They have the big guns. I'm not arguing with them. We always have people with internal applicants, and I'm sure you have the same thing in a lot of your programs. And again, this is where having not a rigid NRMP type process can give you the opportunity. And every year I have programs call me up and say, hey, Bruce, we really have an internal person. How do we handle this? And I say, look, not a problem. We understand. We can pull that position out of the match. All we want in the end is their name. So we have our list at the end. And you want to know something? It works really, really well. We also have some of our programs are path only, so they tend to be off our cycle. We're recruiting 1 year out. They tend to recruit with you 2 years out. So they're not in our process. So the concept is, if you're going to argue, and we always have here and there a program that maybe finagled a little something 1 year. And I always try to calm that down. Don't get excited. I go to the program director. I say, look, I understand this is complex. We really appreciate you participating as much as possible. And I think what you're going to find is you don't need all your programs to agree. If you can get enough critical mass and you already have enough support among the fellows, and which is kind of a proxy for the applicants, that if you have a critical mass of programs agreeing to this process, I suspect that the other programs will begin to fall in line. Why? Because applicants are going to say, yeah, I'd love to come to your program, but I have a shot at 25 or 40 programs if I wait next week for the process. It's going to make, I think, a big difference for you. What have been some of the limits we've had? This is more personal for me. I've been running this process myself. So I'm also trying to match my program at the same time I'm managing those documents, having program directors who, of course, were busy and waited to the last minute, and now they can't access a document, and I've got to fix their technical problems. So for me, it's gotten more and more complex over the years. So I've really pushed the group to move towards a more match-like process, and we have. And what we ended up doing, we're informaticians, we wrote our own algorithm, and our professional society, the American Medical Informatics Association, will be hosting a more formal match process, hopefully later this year, if not certainly in 2022. Take small steps, right? If you can get everyone to agree to a common application process, wow, huge win, right? Take the time to make the case. I mean, this is the right thing to do. We all know it's the right thing to do. All your colleagues, our colleagues, they know it's the right thing to do. They just have to be convinced. And I think, take the time to do it. It's worth it. I think I have one more slide. Yes. So I pirated Liran and Anil's Practical Informatics for Cytopath book into Practical Informatics Advice for Cytopathology Fellowships. You can succeed. I think as a group, if you begin to set the agenda, I think it's easy to outline the benefits for your specialty, for your applicants, for everyone, to agree to a process, to end the chaos and all the stress that it's creating, unnecessary stress for you and for your applicants. Move where you can with intent. Take small steps. Celebrate small victories. Slowly but surely, you get to that point. And eventually, before you know it, it'll take a few years, but you'll be there. And And with that, we'll be taking questions later, I know. So I will now turn it back to the moderators for our next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. We're going to move now to Dr. Shaylan from University of Arkansas, and we're going to pull her PowerPoint up here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to the organizers for asking me to speak. I'm happy to join you today. My name is Sara Shalin. I am at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in Little Rock. I am currently the fellowship director of our Dermatopathology Fellowship Program, but I will say that I was asked to help sort of spearhead this role when I was not a fellowship director. And I actually think that that has allowed me to have a little bit of step back perspective and a little less biased perspective as we have kind of explored some of the issues that have affected our own subspecialty. So I'm going to share with you where we are in dermatopathology with regards to ideas for a match or not, what successes and what challenges we've faced thus far. Okay, I also am not yet able to advance the slides. If someone could give me ability to do that. Let's see. Okay, so
There is just a little bit of a lag. Just give it a second and you'll be able to go.
Thank you. I am going to go ahead while I'll keep talking while I'm waiting for the slide to advance. So I'll just kind of skip to what my first slide talks about. So what were the reasons that we wanted to explore a match in DermPath? I think that there is a general consensus for most people that the current timeline that pathology subspecialties are offering fellowships, interviewing for fellowships, certainly has been pushed earlier and earlier in training. And that this has some negative effects, I think, to both the applicant and to the program itself. For dermatopathology, we can our fellows feed in from either dermatology or pathology. For dermatology, it's a 3-year fellowship program. And so residents that are applying for fellowship in dermatology are asked to apply at the very beginning of their 2nd year currently, which is even earlier than our pathology residents are being asked to apply, which is the beginning of their 2nd year. So, of course, this is detrimental to our applicants in the sense that there's inadequate early exposure to the subspecialty. So, do they have meaningful exposure that tells them, yes, I want to match. I want to try to match in DermPath. I want to pursue DermPath. Is it meaningful? Is it really what they want to do? What if they come along and do forensic pathology later and they decide, oh, wait, I've made a mistake. So dermatopathology is still considered a rather difficult or highly competitive subspecialty match. And so there is pressure on the applicants to then also complete meaningful research and have meaningful publications and experiences in DermPath before they even apply, which again is kind of pushing that earlier and earlier in their training. And then, as Bruce mentioned in his presentation, life happens, right? This happens for our applicants, and things, whether it's that they get exposed to something else or a life personal circumstances change, what they actually want to do as career goals can change over time as well. I think that there's also been some concern expressed by the programs themselves about how this earlier timeline can be detrimental to programs too. Number one, it can be difficult to assess an applicant's commitment to the specialty. And then there's also concern that if an applicant gets a fellowship spot in the beginning of their second year. Some of them kind of check out of the rest of residency, or they don't necessarily perform to the top of their ability, maybe in some of their other subspecialty rotations. So that's been expressed as a concern too. I am still having trouble. I've been periodically trying to advance my slides. I still can't do it. Jamie, I was wondering if you could just try to advance for me. Thank you. So I think this slide basically talks about what I just talked about, and we can go ahead and move to the next slide. Of course, I do think that there are some, so these would be good reasons why we should move to a match. One of the cons of a match is that probably most programs would have to interview more applicants. And there may be a cost incurred with applicants interviewing at more programs. Currently, I'm sure that cytopathology may be similar to DermPath, that in the past, sometimes a program would interview one applicant, maybe a handful of applicants, but as soon as they find an applicant that they like, they might go ahead and extend an offer. And with a match system, there is the necessity of interviewing a pool of applicants before making your decision. So that would be one argument against doing a match. Currently, just so you know where we are in DermPath, there are 55 ACGME accredited programs as of like last week. That probably equates to about 65 fellowship spots. So multiple programs have more than one spot, but most of them are just single spot fellowship programs. I was unable to figure out exactly how many fellowships we have per year. As I mentioned before, you can apply after training in dermatology or pathology, and they do have a different time of residency program, which offers further complication. Next slide, please. So some history for you. Apparently, and this was sort of before I became really involved in our society organization and a practicing dermatopathologist myself, our subspecialty organization, the American Society of Dermatopathology, had tried to kind of have an agreed upon timeline at which to offer fellowship spots. This did not work out very well. There were a lot of programs that went kind of off. They went rogue. They offered spots earlier than had been agreed upon, and there was some resulting animosity. So there was a little bit of hesitancy to re-explore this idea, but we did decide to do so because we know that one of our other dermatology subspecialties, Mohs microsurgery, has had some success in establishing a match system, and they actually do it with the San Francisco match system, which you'll hear a little bit about next. There are younger program directors moving into roles here. There is interest from other subspecialties, such as you all in cytopathology, and then this recognition that our timeline has been pushed earlier and earlier. So for all of these reasons, we felt like it was time to revisit this idea of a match. And in 2016, my subspecialty organization, the American Society of Dermatopathology, agreed to serve as a sponsoring body for a match in dermatopathology if our program directors as a whole decided to pursue a formalized match system. The next slide, please. We do have these options, as Bruce alluded to, with a direct affiliation with an external match system. Also, as Bruce said, the San Francisco match seems to offer a little bit more flexibility than the NRMP, and so this is the one that we have explored more intensively. And we also had this idea that maybe we as a society and as program directors can sort of police ourselves, and we can do an internally standardized timeline. So similar to what Bruce was talking about, with just an agreed upon timeline by which fellowships would be offered. Next slide. And this is what we decided to try first. We had a lot of people hesitant to move to direct affiliation with a match system. So next slide, please. Some of the ground rules that we established are similar to what Bruce talked about. We did establish a code of conduct for both programs and for applicants. We approved a standardized application. We put this application available on our ASDP website so that applicants can come and use it. Most programs agreed that they would accept the standardized application. And so that has been favorably looked at by applicants to ease their application anxiety. And then one of the things that we did as sort of within the code of conduct was that we established flexible special circumstances. And Bruce alluded to some of these that his group has established as well. So we set out from the beginning, we said that that programs would be allowed to be exempt from this timeline or from a match if we move to a formalized match under special circumstances. And so currently what those exist are, number one, a preference to train an internal candidate. So if you have an internal candidate that wants to do your specialty and there is mutual agreement, you would not be held to the same standardized timeline or match system. Also, if you have agreed to hire someone in a job position and you want to go ahead and train them in fellowship as well. And then we left a very vague other circumstances, meaning that, again, having the flexibility for any kind of reasonable reasons to exclude yourself from this timeline would be considered. With the idea that they would be presented to the Fellowship Training Match Committee for approval prior to the match or the agreed upon timeline. Next slide, please. So it actually took quite some time to get agreed upon agreement from the program directors and enough buy-in. Talking about this at program director meetings year after year. Finally, in 2019, we got sufficient approval and a majority approval to try out an internally devised, agreed upon timeline. So this was for fellowships that would then begin in 2021. What we did was that we agreed to have the participating programs listed on our ASDP website. We thought this would get buy-in from programs to have sort of a little bit of free, PR that, I'm participating in this timeline. And we ended up getting 77% of programs, which was 44 at the time, programs to agree to participate on this timeline. And we all agreed on the dates. A lot of this was done via email communication, and some programs I never heard from at all. As you can see, I'm just showing you some of the data that I collected during the course of this. So some reasons of programs that specifically decided not to participate in this timeline. One actually was very adamant that they only wanted to participate in a match, in an externally administered match, and not in an internally devised timeline. We had some programs that asked for contingencies, so they would participate if there was sufficient number of other programs. We had some other exceptions where military programs couldn't guarantee of being in control of the timeline, and then some who offer off-cycle or offer every other year. Next slide, please. So I have a screenshot here at the top that shows what our first timeline was. We did try to push the date closer to the actual start of timeline, and what we ended up agreeing on was November 15th of 2019. This was the earliest date that a program could offer a fellowship position, and then we gave the applicant 72 hours to accept or decline. And so that was to give the applicant a reasonable amount of time to hear if they may have heard from other programs, and to really think about the process and make a meaningful answer. So after that date, you could extend an offer at any time, and we did encourage programs to give some thinking time for the applicants. So after this happened, the general agreement was that the date was too late. the major concern that was voiced was that because so many other subspecialties had sort of followed DermPath's initial path of offering earlier and earlier, now we are faced with a lot of the other subspecialties offering fellowships well before this November 15th date. And so programs felt that they were losing qualified applicants to other subspecialties. There was also some concern that some of the dermatopathology programs were offering ahead of the agreed upon date, although I don't have any evidence that a program that had agreed to the timeline actually defaulted on it. It may have been some of those programs who never agreed to participate in the first place. So this was sort of limited success. Next slide, please. So we decided to go ahead and try it again this year, or this past year. So this was for fellowships beginning in 2022. We revised our date, and you can see that we actually went earlier instead of later, which was our ultimate goal, is to get closer and closer to the initial time of fellowship starting. So this past year, we had a date of October 1st. The other circumstances were very much the same. And the problem was that many fewer programs actually agreed to participate this time. I think they felt it was of limited success last time. So only about half of programs agreed to participate. And then, of course, COVID happened, and there was this switch to virtual interviewing. And I had a lot of programs that emailed me privately and said, how is this going to affect things? You know, what is going to happen? Is this going to affect the timeline? And I think as a result, many programs decided to take internal applicants. And as you recall, that was sort of one of the conditions that we said you didn't have to go by the timeline. So we suddenly have a lot of programs that were offering well before October. And then I do know in this past cycle that we did have a couple of programs who had agreed upon the timeline, who did offer fellowship spots to external applicants before the date. So there's been a lot of frustration in this past cycle that we were actually less successful than the first time around. Next slide, please. So I think there is still a general consensus from program directors in DermPath that we have a desire to improve the process for both applicants and programs. I think this has to do largely with the timeline, also with some transparency. And actually the documents that Bruce talked about in his presentation are something that we sort of have only just started exploring as maybe that could help us as we move through another attempt to kind of try to gain some ground. However, I think our group definitely has some skepticism about whether this can be done successfully without an externally administered formal match system that will actually lock the dates for us. I will say that as of April of last year, 69% of program directors did support an externally administered match system. We had been aiming for 75% support before we would move forward with actually affiliating with the San Francisco match. So we were almost there. Because our annual meeting was virtual this year, we didn't have a program directors meeting that is being held, I think, later this month or next month. So we'll kind of take another temperature reading at that time. One of the big things that we are interested in doing, though, is having this conversation with other subspecialties about a shared timeline, because I think it doesn't certainly just affect DermPath. I think it's affecting all of our subspecialties. So if we could agree as a pathology, shared umbrella of multiple subspecialties to move our timeline closer to the start of fellowships, I think it would be of benefit to both applicants and programs. I think my last slide is the next one. I'm just about done. I've been told this is like turning a battleship. You have to move slowly to gain consensus, and you have to be patient. And I do fear that we are trembling between a little bit of capsizing sometimes, especially with this last go round. That is not to give you, that's not to make you scared about embracing this this opportunity, because I do think it's a good opportunity, and I think ultimately it will benefit programs and applicants. But it is a process, and I think you can learn from our experiences and Bruce's experiences. And as you guys move forward in this, I think each time, each iteration will be better. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'll be happy to stick around for questions after the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. I appreciate that. I feel like, although it was a difficult process, I feel like you've kind of laid out exactly kind of a lot of the concerns that program directors have and how this can evolve over time, and how people's level of emphasis or enthusiasm about the match can change. So I appreciate your advice. Okay, we're now going to switch to our last speaker, Dennis from the San Francisco match. And I've had some conversations with Dennis, and he's really great in terms of explaining what San Francisco match can offer to fellowship programs. And there are a lot of fellowship programs, not in pathology, but in other subspecialties that do use San Francisco match. And a lot of people have talked about how the flexibility in the timeline and the fact that they offer a centralized application service are real highlights of their program. So I'm interested for everyone to hear kind of his perspective about what San Francisco match can offer to pathology fellowships like Cytopath.
Absolutely, and thank you very much. Very honored to be here as a panelist today, to be invited. The SF match has been around since 1977, and really I want to share is really 5 points that a match can bring, whether it's us or someone else. It's really stability, consistency, sort of easing the burden on a society or group to run a consistent match, having a unified portal for information, not just for the applicants and programs, but also for the public as well, a place for statistics, etc. Really a place for, as you grow as a group, a place where you can get live phone support to help with questions that come up, rules that we pass on. The SF match really operates on behalf of a sponsoring society. So we don't take actions. It's really running your match. That's what we do. Discussions with the group, always happy to work. This would be honored to work with him again, and with the entire group. We're always happy to work with a group that wants to grow, wants to succeed, and wants to look for a consistent solution. That's really sort of what we look for when we bring on a client. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Dennis, can you just explain how if you can move closer to your microphone too, I wanted you to explain to everyone that you guys offer a match process, but also a centralized application service as well to the applicants, correct?
Absolutely. So the system we've developed and have sort of redeveloped has a centralized portal both for matching and for application processing. All the documents come into one place. The programs have access to a portal where they can download those documents. The applicants really have direct access to upload documents. They don't have to mail in. And then the programs have access to data in multiple ways. They can download spreadsheets. They can see the photo once they've invited someone for an interview. They can organize the material and handle their rank lists, and then also have an archive of their data going forward. So year after year after year, they can have access to the data, as we don't destroy it. We maintain it for consistency.
And I think part of all the features that San Francisco Match offers are kind of highlighted on your website, where you can look at different subspecialty fellowship programs and how you guys kind of provide a code of conduct and police the system. And it sounds like maybe dermatopathology has had a hard time policing the formalized process. And so San Francisco Match offers a way to take that policing off and put it on your shoulders and not so much our shoulders. Is that correct?
I think the correct is really the path you're already going down. Developing a code of conduct is the strongest way to have consistency. If you look at our site and you look at orthopedics and you drill down, there's 7 subspecialties, and several of them offer a very specific code of conduct. Here's what happens if you do this, and if you don't do this. It just makes it more fair for everyone. And so we don't police. The SF Match is actually sort of independent. We facilitate and help the society to run their match through their rules. And if a rule's broken, what we have found consistently is the fellows will come forward and let us know, and then we'll share that with the group and the society so it can be addressed consistently. And again, it's all about consistency and making it fair.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, I'm going to have all of the speakers put on their webcams again, and we'll start a question and answer. And I'll start with Dr. Levy because I know he has to go to another meeting. The question for Dr. Levy is, do you know if AMIA has any plans to make this sort of match algorithm available to other fellowships or subspecialties in the future?
A good question. I don't know that. At this point, we're still working out the details of how they're going to operationalize it for us. So I think that's probably a little bit of a premature question. But I suspect depending on how successful they are with us, will influence how interested they'd be in doing that for other groups. Thanks for the question.
Another question for Dr. Levy, and maybe Dr. Shaylan can also weigh in. Do you think there should be consequences for non-adherence? And would that make more programs or less programs adhere to it if you had stricter rules? So I don't know if anyone's I know you both said you have a code of conduct, but didn't actually say what's in the code of conduct. So we purposefully did not have any consequences, and I think we talked about this. And first of all, we're not in a position to police each other, and we don't want to be in a position to police each other. We want our programs and our program directors to agree because it's the right thing to do and it's the fair thing to do. And if they don't want to do it, I think nothing more than obviously everyone expressing their displeasure, kind of a peer pressure sort of a situation is really going to help. But I also think as if you have a process that draws the applicants, where the applicants are like, look, I'd love to accept your offer, but I've got 10 other programs I'd also really like to hear from first. Will also help to make the difference. And if you have a structure by which the applicants feel confident that they have a place to go, they may also kind of exert a type of peer pressure. Sarah, any thoughts?
I'd like to say ditto, 100%. Our program directors also discussed, should there be consequences? Can we levy consequences on programs that do not participate, or for this internally, we're not locked into dates. This was all sort of a better word, a gentleman's agreement on the timeline. Can we levy some consequences? And we decided that we really can't. This does have to be in good faith. It has to be because we want to do it. But we do think that we drew heavily on the experience from Mohs Microsurgery and their experience developing a match that has now been very successful, in my understanding, that as more programs get on board, there becomes a peer pressure to go by the rules, and applicants want to go through the formal process rather than, getting an offer that doesn't allow them to explore their full options of other programs as well. So that there is a lot of positive peer pressure once you get a certain momentum going, that I think it draws it towards a successful conclusion. I don't think DermPath is quite there yet, but I am hopeful. I'm still supportive of this, of moving towards this, and I think we can get there. It sounds like Bruce's group has been successful, and I know most successful.
Do you think that
look, we had the advantage of we started at the beginning when there were no programs. So, it wasn't like we had another process and had to adjust. So I think there's some additional challenges, but not overcomable.
Do you think that the process benefits small or large programs? Like, I feel like smaller programs in geographically maybe isolated areas want to just grab on to the few applicants that are truly interested and just grab one, and are worried that maybe they would lose that applicant and not fill. And as a corollary question, like, what do you do with programs that don't fill by the match deadline? Is there any way to put out what applicants are not matched up yet?
Two great questions. In the case of unmatched applicants, what ends up happening there is, unfortunately, because we're using ERAS, we don't have access to the names of all the applicants nationwide, but we certainly have, the applicants have access to the documents that show which programs still have openings. So it then becomes more on the applicants who have the knowledge of the programs that still have spots to do the reaching out, but we have been trying to address that issue of how we can open up a process, for after our process. And what was the first part of the question? Oh, God, it slipped my mind.
Do you feel like it benefits small or large?
Oh, yeah. Well, look, Geisinger is a small rural program. We are as competitive. We are in there competing with Vanderbilt and Stanford and Harvard. And we are matching and filling our program every year with people we want. So, maybe it's the fault of we have a wealth of applicants who are just phenomenal. So, we might interview 15, 18 people for our 2 spots. And really we would probably take any 2 of them. That's how good they are by the time they get to the interviews cycle.
How about you, Sara? Do you feel like any feedback from large or small DermPath programs?
So I think that I do think that there's a legitimate concern on behalf of the smaller programs that they're not, or more geographically remote programs, or not as well known programs, which is not necessarily related to size, that they are going to miss out on some of these great applicants if we move to a match. That all those applicants are going to highly rank other places, and if they don't offer early, they'll miss out. And so that's been some of the reluctance. I think it's truly there. That said, I would kind of echo again what Bruce said, that all programs that I've talked to, it's rare for a program to go unfilled in dermatopathology. When I first started here at UAMS, we did not have a fellow set for the following year, and we were still able to recruit a amazing fellow 9 months ahead of the fellowship start date. And she was tremendous. So the applicants are there, and I think the concern that you out on a certain applicant just is kind of selling the whole applicant pool a little bit short. And then in regards to unmatched applicants, what do we do about that? Well, there was a lot of confusion in the past cycle, and we that's actually, we had program directors emailing, I have an applicant that still hasn't found a program yet, which programs are open. And that's actually what caused us to start the conversation of having some kind of shared document, which I think is something that Bruce has said has been very instrumental in their program, and I think is something that we're going to continue to explore as being on the front end rather than the back end, to kind of smooth the process along.
So one last question for Bruce and Sara would be do you think that it would be helpful if the Association for Pathology chairs took the lead on this and having all fellowships agree to a timeline that then subspecialty societies could roll out for their programs. So whether that would be a huge advantage if there was a mass group of.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll say that from a dermatopathology perspective, I think that is actually what we sent our program directors that had connections to other programs and other subspecialty fellowship groups. Go back to those programs and ask, would there be consensus? Could we get some consensus building about, as a whole umbrella of pathology, kind of trying to push that timeline back? Because I think for DermPath program directors, knowing that other subspecialties are also moving to offer fellowship spots closer to the start date of fellowship, would get a lot more traction and buy-in.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is that APC already has an ad hoc committee of fellowship directors asking some of these very questions, and I'm on that group representing informatics. So, if a group like Cytopath were to go to APC, and DermPath and start to express interest in this, I think that would be well received by APC. I don't think they would want to impose anything, but I think they would love to kind of organize it and lead this if possible.
I just want to thank all of you. I'm trying to be cognizant of people's time today. So I want to thank all three of you. I'm going to, if the audience will hang on, I'm going to do a few more slides that showing some new data. Jamie, if you'll advance the slide. So Dr. Ritu Nayar, who's prior ASC president and a trustee of the American Board of Pathology, shared with me some kind of new data that we have from the AB Path survey that went out to program directors, kind of asking about how we are aligning our programs with the current practice of cytopathology. And so we will submit a handout to all the audience members and get this on the ASC website with some ideas and advantages and disadvantages, and sort of summarizing today's session. So Jamie, you can advance. So we'll distribute this. And before we do the final polling, sorry for the delay here. So this is the new data that Dr. Nayar shared with me. This is from about 74% of cytopathology program directors that were surveyed from March to July 2020. Most of the program directors on the call right now will remember getting this survey this past spring. Jamie, you can advance to the next slide. So the results showed a couple of things. So the first question was, were there specific criteria used for fellow recruitment decisions for your program? And the majority said yes, that there were criteria. And when asked what those criteria were, it was USMLE completion, prior residency training experience, and cytology-related publications were the most common. And then I think this is kind of an interesting question. It said, please indicate when fellowship application recruitment or interviews are conducted. And the majority of people felt like the 18 to 24 month timeline was the majority, with a lesser percent saying 12 to 18 months. And if you kind of remember Sara Shalin sharing the DermPath data, it's a similar time frame there, where they were recruiting in 2019 for 2021 programs. Next slide. And then other question, would you be supportive of a fellowship matching program similar to the NRMP? And remember, this was only program directors, not trainees. And 43% said yes. However, with the corollary question, it said, given the currently expanding job market, recent graduates seem to be dropping out of fellowship programs and opting to take positions instead of spending another year as a fellow. In light of this, would you support a fellowship matching program where the fellowship contract would be binding? And there was an overwhelmingly 100% yes to that question, which I think kind of shows how people are a little bit frustrated with the current ability for people just to withdraw late in the game. Okay, with that, we're going to take our final polling questions. And as you can imagine, the first question is now, kind of after this webinar, would you be in favor of a cytopathology fellowship match program? And this is for sort of everyone in the audience. And when we say a match program, we don't necessarily mean a formalized match by San Francisco or NRMP. We mean really sort of moving towards an informal match program or formalized. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share. So it seems like 60% of you would be in favor of the match, 26% unsure, and 14% not in favor. So it seems like today's webinar maybe convinced a few people that maybe some sort of formalized or informalized match would be helpful. And the next question is, if we were to do a sort of informal or formalized match, what would be the preferred time frame for you? Would it be 12 months prior to fellowship would be the offer date, and application deadline 18 months prior, 18 months offer date with the application deadline 20 months prior, so giving you 2 months to interview, 18-month deadline for the actual match date with an application deadline at 24 months prior, giving you 6 months to look at applications and interview, or 24 months prior to fellowship having the match date and application deadline being 30 months prior. So kind of a complicated question. The first time frame, we were limited by characters by GoToWebinar, but the first time frame would be your actual match day. The second time frame would be when the applications would start rolling into you. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share. So it sounds like the majority would prefer 12 months prior to fellowship having the offer date and an application deadline 18 months prior, giving people 6 months to look at applications and interview. Okay, and the final question we have today is, if we were not to do a cytopathology fellowship match, would you be supportive of a unified time frame alone as a first step? Sort of kind of like Dr. Shaylan talked about with DermPath, how they started agreeing upon a time frame first, even though that time frame has evolved and changed over the years. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll here and share. So it sounds like the overwhelming majority would be supportive of a unified time frame alone as a first step, which I think is progress. Okay, so that's the end of our webinar. I wanted to thank everyone, our panelists and our audience, for joining us today on this busy inauguration day and work day. We'll be sharing handouts after the webinar. And feel free to reach out to me or my committee if there's anything we can do to help you as program directors. And one last thing I'll say is that join us for the next 2 Wednesdays. Dr. Sebis will be continuing the Wednesday webinars with thyroid cytology.